So for the unaired pilot, the exposition, basic exposition, was so awful that they had to beg HBO for a redo. Now, I talked at the beginning how they got that second chance, how they got the redo. Now, what are the repercussions of that? Well, in interviews, Benioff and Weiss have consistently said that about 90% of the pilot had to be refilmed. But that means, there should be like 10% left over. Little things, and they have pointed these out over the years. One or two little scenes that didn't really have a lot of exposition or were pretty much like the book, so it didn't really make sense to refilm them. First and foremost, the only really big scene is when Ned and Robert are visiting Lyanna's tomb in the crypts. That is pretty much straight from the pilot. And there's just one or two other little beats in that, a few lines between Ned and his younger brother Benjen at the Winterfell feast, and Tyrion's introductory brothel scene with Ros, also pretty much what was in the pilot. There might have been some lines changed around, but pretty much what was in it. And also, a relic of the pilot is when you see really blonde Tyrion and blonde Theon. That Tyrion in the books has very pale white hair, so does Tommen. Not so much the honey blonde of Cersei, and they tried to do that. And just, in real life, Peter Dinklage has very dark hair, and it looked really unnatural when they gave him this really light-haired wig that didn't fit the actor. So, in the main series, he has more of a dirty blonde, honey blonde color to better match his skin coloring. And as for Theon, well, Alfie Allen actually has blonde hair in real life. Theon, the character, has black hair. So they tried going with his natural look first. It was kind of weird. For whatever reason, they went to the other one. Martin himself said, I don't really care about hair color that much unless it's plot relevant, like with the Seed is Strong. So just now and again, when they're like in a courtyard getting off their horses, it didn't really make much sense to refilm that. So you'll see, like in the background, blonde Theon or really blonde Tyrion in relic shots, even intercut in Winter is Coming. But that's just trivia. That doesn't really affect anything. But the thing I think is cool as trivia, though, is the gap between when they filmed the pilot and when they had to come back and film for season 1 was around the time that television as a whole was shifting from recording on film, cinema film, to recording digitally. The shift to digital cameras happened around that time. So the few surviving, not even scenes, but just shots from the pilot are still recorded on film, and the visual grain looks different. Go and rewatch the crypt scene between Ned and Robert. It's just, this looks more like film from the early 2000s than the digital recording of even the rest of season 1, or other parts, refilmed parts of Winter is Coming. Not that that really affects anything. Now, other fallout happened from having to refilm it, that it takes months to rewrite a script and then reset everything, prep everything. This pushed the schedule back a full year. And inherently, going into it, they knew that meant we are going to lose some cast members. And I don't blame them for this. This is part of the business, that, hey, we're filming a pilot for this thing that might not even happen. Who knows if it'll be renewed for more than one season. I'm not playing a major role. Versus I'm getting job offers to be leads in other TV shows in Britain. So a few actors left, and I hate it how people make excuses for Benioff, working backwards of, how is it his fault that Dorne was a disaster? He's the one that rushed it through production. We know that. Well, how is it his fault that some actors left? They left because it was his fault the script had to spend a year being redone. That, inherently, in movies, sometimes they have rewrites. Some of the actors are going to leave whenever there's a delay. So I still put the blame on them for that, and I really do not even suspect that any of these actors left over creative differences. That the Catelyn actress left because she had a baby. Or other people who are minor Night's Watch members, that this could not have been creative differences. I don't think it's because they didn't like the actors. I think it's purely scheduling conflicts from wasting a year. So who was recast, just to go over that briefly? Well, we don't have images for most of these, of what did the original version look like. This is our mythical, legendary, we'd love to see set photos of this someday. But some of them we do have them for. First up is Illyrio Mopatis of Pentos in the Daenerys storyline, was originally played by Ian McNeice, who I remember most as playing the Baron Harkonnen in the 2000 Sci-Fi Channel miniseries adaptation of Dune. But he's a veteran British actor. I've seen him in a lot of things. He's really good. So he was originally Illyrio, and it's fun watching these early costume ideas that were later abandoned. That this idea they had was that Pentoshi noblemen and magisters would wear these huge, ostentatious hats, intentionally silly, to show off how wealthy they are. And that idea was later abandoned in the full series. That isn't an idea from the books or anything. Next up, a few of the Night's Watch scouts in the prologue scene were recast. These are people who die in that episode anyway. Chief among which was Waymar Royce, the officer among them. Originally, he was played by Jamie Campbell Bower, and this is the other one that we actually have a photo for. And that's interesting because just a few weeks ago, it was announced that he was cast as a regular role in the potential Long Night prequel, the Long Night prequel pilot. So he's going to have been in 2 pilots in this franchise. But they said in news things after that, well, we really liked him 10 years ago, and at the time made a mental note. Remember this guy, we'd like to use him in a future project. That he left because he went to star in that Camelot show. So, good for him. But the next 2 are the ones that had really significant impact, recasting Daenerys and Catelyn. Daenerys Targaryen was originally played by Tamsin Merchant, who is probably best well known for playing Catherine Howard on The Tudors, the Henry VIII show. She was wife number 5. And I think that's funny because, Natalie Dormer, Marjorie Tyrell, she famously played Anne Boleyn on that show, wife number 2. And if you know the rhyme, to keep track of his 6 wives for Henry VIII, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard were both beheaded. They're the ones that were beheaded. And so potentially Merchant and Dormer would have both been on this. I just think that's funny, but we have no idea how she played the role, how different it would have been. We only have a vague guess at how it was differently written. I don't think it was rewritten that differently from the book because she doesn't talk that much in the first episode because if you read the book, so much of it is she's this frightened abuse victim of Viserys that she dares not speak her thoughts aloud, that a lot of it is internal, and I get that. So I don't know how much they actually needed to change it. How different was it? That is a complete mystery to me. I don't know. But they had to refilm the entire Daenerys subplot simply because it's a different actress. I don't know how closely it followed the final shooting script. It might have followed it very closely when they redid it. The other issue with that is, in the pilot, the Daenerys storyline was filmed in Morocco, the wedding, but in the intervening year, they shifted to Malta. So her wedding, her outdoor wedding, is filmed at this famous location in Malta with that stone formation in the background that actually fell down like a year or 2 ago in a storm. The stone arch that they were filming that near, that's not there anymore. It's sad. It was a famous landmark. And they went back to film a few bits of Slaver's Bay, Morocco in season 3, but then they shifted back to Croatia. But they were trying to film there, so we have never really seen much of anything from the Morocco shoot of the Daenerys storyline. And think about it, Daenerys is in virtually every shot, and there might plausibly have been an interior scene which didn't need to be in Morocco, filmed between Viserys and Illyrio, but then Illyrio was recast too. If you have Daenerys and Illyrio recast, the camera would always be on a recast person. So the whole thing was refilmed. There is nothing from that lost shoot there, which is sad for us because that's where George R. R. Martin filmed his first and only cameo in the Morocco wedding shoot for Daenerys. And he talked about it for years openly. He said, well, all the Pentoshi noblemen looked like original Illyrio. And we did have a photo of that for 7 years. It's got this big hat. And he said, well, I was dressed sort of like Illyrio with this really funny big hat. And I regret that, it's never been in a deleted scene or anything. And just a few months ago, Elio and Linda of Westeros.org went to Northern Ireland to visit some of the production staff. And one of them, they went through their archives and they managed to find a photo of Martin from the pilot shoot in full costume as an in-universe character. So he's dressed like Illyrio in his funny hat, and you see how happy he is. This is this book series I made, and now here I am. And us as fans, this thing has been mythical for 7 years, trying to find an image of Martin in full costume on set in his cameo. For Season 8, he was offered a cameo and declined, saying he's busy writing his books, and he's not even reading the Season 8 scripts. They told him an outline. He said, well, that's the outline you want to do. Hey, do you want to read our scripts? Not really. So this isn't really much of his input at this point, no matter what you think. But okay, so that's what did the Morocco shoot look like. And as I said, I don't really know if they changed that much in most of it. Like, how was Tamsin Merchant's Daenerys different? That wasn't really the issue. The last and biggest one, though, is recasting Catelyn Stark. And unlike the Daenerys one, where you had to completely redo everything, like, the Winterfell storyline is intercutting between different characters who aren't always interacting with Catelyn. Now, in the original version of the pilot, Catelyn Stark was played by actress Jennifer Ely. I looked up how to pronounce that. It's pronounced Ely. And she's nice, and I'll talk more about this in a later section, but they actually drastically changed the writing of Catelyn from the pilot to the main series. But talking just about practical production so far, an issue with that is, for whatever reason, during the Winterfell feast, when Sansa goes up to the main table and meets Cersei for the first time as she's sitting next to Catelyn, either they really liked Sophie Turner's performance in it, or there was a scheduling conflict with Sophie, which I guess could come up child actors. Rather than refilm the whole thing, they spliced in Sophie's performance from the pilot with new Catelyn, Michelle Fairley, sitting next to Cersei. And if you notice, they're never within the same camera frame at the same time. They're pointed at one or the other. That whenever the camera is pointed at the table at Cersei and new Catelyn, it's just over the shoulder with Sansa's sleeve on the side, but that isn't Sophie Turner wearing it. That they had to refilm it. And like I was talking about that film grain thing before, that when Sophie is in it, it's on film, but when it cuts to the other angle, it's on a digital recording, that you can tell that it doesn't match up. There's a slight difference in visual quality. But I don't know why they did that. There are myriad reasons why that could have happened. I never noticed this when I was watching it. It was seamlessly edited. But it's interesting. The other side effect of that is, if Sean Bain has to refilm a scene with new Catelyn a year later, that doesn't really affect anything. So he's a year younger in the crypts. What difference is that for a man in his 30s or 40s? But, the child actors, Sophie is a full year younger in the pilot shot from this conversation, that she looks noticeably younger in this relative to the very next scene she's in. It's because they're filmed a year apart. In terms of other differences stemming from new and deleted and moved around scenes from refilming the pilot, another small revelation from Martin's script he submitted to Cushing Library is, it seems the original pilot, or at least his draft of it, was going to have a few more scenes that were straight from the books, which were probably just cut for time because they didn't have weird exposition in them because they're straight from the book. First and foremost, we actually heard about this one already, that originally we were going to get the training yard scene. And they actually filmed this because we have a behind-the-scenes featurette had an image from it. We recognized Tommen would only be in training gear if you're filming that specific scene from the books. There's a scene where, because Cersei never lets him grow up, and she never lets him train to be a man, train to be fighting as a soldier. And when the Starks are there, they're like, hey, would you like to have a practice fencing lesson with Bran? And Bran kicks his ass. But Tommen is grateful that, like, my mom never lets me get out of the house, and you're honoring me by, helping me train. And it's showing that Cersei isn't really a good mother to him. And then at the end of it, Roger Cassell goes, hey, Robb, would you like to spar with Joffrey? And Joffrey's like, no, we'll use real live steel, not wood swords. He's blustering because it turns out Joffrey's actually not that great of a swordsman compared to Robb. And you think about how much of the war they don't really meet face to face. This was like the only... I don't think Robb and Joffrey ever exchanged dialogue in Winter is Coming, the first episode. This was going to be the only Robb versus Joffrey scene, and then, like, by season 2, when they're hurling insults through letters, they're not meeting face to face. And this was also in the online script. Of course it was, because it went to the point it was actually filmed. I don't know if they filmed Robb and Joffrey trading insults, but they did they probably did, because they did film Tommen and Bran mock fighting with wood swords. So that went in fairly late. I think it was purely cut for time. Another minor thing that was cut was, straight from the books, Jon, because he can't sit up with the nobles, he goes down to sit with the commoners, and because he's not supervised, he goes, I can get really drunk. At least I have that going for me, that there's one benefit of being shunned from the highborn table. And then his uncle Benjen comes to find him, and he's actually really fall over drunk, and he stumbles and knocks over a waitress. That happened in the books. I agree they should have cut it, because with limited screen time, it doesn't give a good sense of what Jon is like most of the time, that he's really upset right then. And more of a beat than a full scene they cut, related to that, is then Jon leaves and goes outside to be in the practice yard alone, because he's embarrassed he got drunk and he's sobering up, and then he runs into Tyrion. The one minor difference is that in the pilot script, it says that Tyrion would then meet Ghost the Direwolf. This happens in the books. He goes, wow, a direwolf. These things don't live south of the wall. I've never seen one before. And he's an intelligent guy who wants to say, whoa, what's a direwolf like? So he goes up, inspects him slowly, gives him a light pat on the head, which Ghost allows. So it's just, wow, this is what a direwolf is. I assume they cut that because it's so hard to wrangle live animals on set that we don't see a lot of the direwolves, because they go, it's not like a CGI dragon. You have any idea how hard it is to maneuver around a wolf actor, an actor wolf? And there are a few other scenes that we know these were totally rewritten. They have no equivalent in the pilot. They're entirely new scenes, not just rewritten. That the introduction of the Stark children when Bran is learning his archery lesson, that's entirely new. And then that you first see Sansa and Arya they're at a sewing circle, then Arya sneaks off to go to that archery contest. That was entirely new. That wasn't in the pilot. So just the transition from pilot to main series, well, what did they change? What did they take out? What did they add that was entirely new? We're getting a sense of how the pieces were falling together, while still, this is because there were real problems with exposition that we should have seen a problem was coming.